So I'm sure everyone is aware of what is the competitiveness being in business area. More formally, in this chapter, competitiveness has been defined as how effectively an organization meets the wants and needs of customers related to others, meaning their competitors, that offer similar products or services. Now, the key thing here is difference between needs and wants. One example I can give is, let's say somebody is thirsty and needs a drink. So want in this case will be more specifically if that person needs, let's say, Pepsi. So that is a want. But the basic need is to drink something. It's like somebody who needs cell phone to communicate but wants an iPhone. Businesses compete in different ways. They can compete using marketing. Marketing helps a company to identify customer or consumer wants and needs. They are more close to the customer, so obviously they can find what are the changing patterns in consumer behavior and what is going to be more successful in future. And that information is provided to operations, and then they try to incorporate those features or those trends in a way that the company can benefit and also help the consumer. Another factor is pricing. So pricing obviously is very, very important. One example I can give is when Apple came out with iPad, the entry level price was $499. And then when competitors like Samsung, they brought Samsung Tab, they kept the price around $499. The only thing is they wanted to compete with more features in their product like camera and also Google's Android. But then Apple came with iPad 2 and maintained the price. So now to compete, Samsung had to bring down the price of their product which they released earlier. To be competitive, pricing is obviously very, very important. If somebody has a good product or service, it has to be advertised also so that people come to know about it. And nowadays, with internet and websites, all such information can be basically given to a potential customer very quickly. Now, businesses also compete using operations. So they try to have operations which are very, very efficient and very effective. And if they can manage with like low resources, less and less resources at a lower cost, that's going to be very competitive. The first one here is product and service design. If the design is good and if they can meet the requirements of the design and bring the product to the market, the product will be very, very competitive. Cost for operations to be competitive is very important. Like when somebody launches a new product, initially the cost may be high, but as they get to know about it more closely and they improve their processes in such a way that they can produce the same thing, product or service, at a lower cost, so that makes a company more competitive. Cost reduction could be done by a company on their own, or it may be forced upon them by their competitors. Like one example is Kindle. So when Amazon came out with this e-reader, initially, if you recall, it used to cost more than $700. So it was very, very expensive. And the only function it did was that you could buy books and also read books or listen to them. But now the same company, their entry level Kindle cost about $114. So obviously competitors played a very big role in bringing the price from more than $700 to slightly over $100. But then it could not have been done only because of competitive pressure. They would have certainly reduced their costs in their processes so that they can sell a similar product at a much lower cost. Location is again very, very important. A company may have a good service or a product, keeping in mind what they are dealing with and what type of product they have. They have to choose their location very wisely. If they are in a business like automotive companies where they get a lot of material from their suppliers, if the suppliers are close, most of the suppliers are close to this OEM, then that will reduce the transportation costs of providing the parts. Also, it will save a lot of time. So location is obviously very, very important. It is more so for services because in case of services, customers and the service provider, they generally come in contact with each other. So closer the better. If you talk about a service like somebody is interested in getting haircut, and if there is a shop somewhere in New York who are known for their excellent service, they may be very popular, they may do a very good job, but nobody is going to drive from Dartmouth to New York just to get a haircut. Location obviously is very, very important. Quality, again, without doubt, quality plays a very important role in making a company competitive. A company also should be able to respond to competitive pressure in a quick fashion. One example I can give is Microsoft and Nokia. So recently they announced they will have a tie-up. They have a operating system for the smartphone, Symbian, which they are going to replace by Windows, which is manufactured by Microsoft. This is happening because of the competitive pressure. Nokia is losing a lot of ground in smartphone business because of iPhone and also Android-based phones. But what they said when they talked about bringing out phones with Windows, they said it may take about, in fact, more than 1 year. Now, in this smartphone business, 1 year is a very, very long time. Like people are coming out with new versions of their products within a year. They're planning to come out with the first version with Windows after a year. That's too late. So one has to be very, very responsive. In fact, the day Nokia announced that they will come out with these new phones, in the short term, they downgraded their outlook for the company. Their market share went down by, I think, more than 15% on a single day, and it is still losing some ground. How quick a company can respond to the competitive pressure and challenges is very, very important. And they can do only when they have a very efficient operations management. Flexibility is very important. Inventory management obviously plays a very important role because whatever inventory a company stores, it is going to be very, very expensive. It costs money, so they don't want to spend a lot of money just for storing inventory. Supply chain management also is gaining momentum because nowadays, because of globalization, suppliers are scattered all over the world. It has to be efficiently managed. Service and service quality is also critical because 80% of the jobs, as we know from the last chapter, are in service area. And managers and workers obviously play a very, very important role. Now, why some companies fail? There are so many factors, the list can go on and on. On this slide, we have only listed few important ones. Too much emphasis on short-term financial performance. So sometimes people are looking only from a quarter to quarter, what's going on. If a company does not have a plan where they want to be in next 2, 5, maybe 10 years, then they are very short-sighted and they may be caught off guard, like what happened to Research in Motion or Nokia, failing to take advantage of strengths and opportunities. So when companies spend a lot of time reactively instead of being proactive, the chances of their failure is going to be high. If they look at a competitor and when they come out with their products and when it becomes very, very successful and a company is waiting to see that they are successful and then decide to go about it, doing something about it, it's too late. I read when Apple introduced iPhone first time, their engineers were already working on the next product, iPad. And when iPad came to the market, so many of their competitors were surprised by this good product. Neglecting operation strategy obviously is the medicine for failure. Failing to recognize competitive threats. Too much emphasis on product service design. It's not that this is bad, but too much emphasis, and then if it doesn't translate into a good product or service, then again, it is a problem. For example, Microsoft came out with various products they developed in competition to Apple. They developed June, and then suddenly they had to abandon. Cisco, they developed these flip videos, and they had to abandon. When people spend a lot of time, but if they are not able to translate into a successful product, that leads some companies to fail. Neglecting investment in capital and human resources. So that this is also very critical. Failing to establish good internal communications. So one example is HP. There was a news that an email which was sent by the CEO, a memo which had details like the company, the difficulties the company is having, and they may have to reduce the headcount, they cannot hire more people because of the problems they are facing in some divisions. All that leaked outside the company. So although it was meant for internal communication, such things put a bad name to companies. Like HP market share suffered because of those events, and people saw that they do not have confidence in some of their businesses. So that affected the sentiment in the market. So failing to consider customer wants and needs obviously is a recipe for failure. Now businesses have mission, strategy, and tactics which they use for competitiveness. Mission is more high level, and basically it is the purpose for which an organization exists. Using the mission, which is with generally long term, a company comes out with what strategies they can develop or what roadmap they can have so that they can achieve their mission. And then tactics are the tools and methods people use on a day-to-day basis. In fact, on the next slide, we have a brief definition of all these terms. So we talked about mission and mission statement. Now goals provide detail and scope of the mission. So goals are like destination. 5 years from now, where we want the company to be, or 10 years from now, where we want to be placed. Are we going to compete internationally or domestically? So all those goals are well defined. And then for those goals, strategies are made, which are the plans for achieving the goals. And strategies are like a roadmap, like how you are going to reach there where you want to go. And the tactics are the tools or the methods employed to reach. So on the next slide, it is depicted graphically. Mission is at the top. So if you look at this triangle, on the top, it has less area. And as you go down, it has more area. So what it means is that mission, goals, these things are something which are not done on a daily basis. This is not something very frequent. They are not more in quantity. They are very few, and that's why you have a lower area. So this is not done very often, and they are few in number. Now, as you go down, now to achieve those mission and goals, there has to be some plan, and that plan has to percolate throughout the organization. So organization needs to have organizational strategy which is applicable to the entire company. Now within the company you have like different areas like finance, marketing, and operations. So they have their own strategies, but all these are linked to the organization strategies and goals. Within each functional area you have the tactics, and then you have more details how you are going to achieve. So one example of a strategy is given on the next slide. If you look at the mission, our mission is to live a good life. The goal would be to have a successful career and good income. Strategy would be to obtain a college degree so that she can add value to her abilities and then make herself more marketable. Tactics would be to select a college and a major. Selecting a college and major obviously also depends on what interests a student has and in what area they want to develop their career. And then there are day-to-day activities like registering for a class, buying books, taking courses, and so on. So there are different strategies a company can have. They can decide to be a low-cost provider. One example is Walmart. Or a company can decide to have scale-based strategies. They want to go for mass production and they want to reduce their per unit cost so that they can sell item at a lower price. Or a company can have a strategy for specialization. So a company may be very good in a particular area, like they may have a very strong design team. So they want to develop their strategies around that. Or a company can go for flexible operations as a strategy. Flexible operation is like whatever production or manufacturing activity a company has, they inbuild flexibility into it. It's not that a machine, for example, only does one type of job, but it can do different varieties of jobs. So it is flexible. Or a company can choose to compete with a strategy of high quality or a very good service. Coming to strategy and tactics, as you see, strategy is a longer term, whereas tactics, you could say, is the day-to-day activities. Distinctive competencies, this is also called as core competencies. Core competencies are the special attributes or abilities that give an organization a competitive advantage. So if a company has something special, distinctive or core, because that's their strength, they can use that strength to compete successfully in the market. For example, the Google's core competency was in the area of search. So they had built their business around that core competency. So we talked about the strategy factors on the last slide also. More examples actually are given on the next slide. So if you look at price as a strategy, and if a company wants to compete with low cost, so companies like US First Class Postage, Motel 6, Red Roof, you can also probably add Walmart. Although this list is still applicable, but you can easily add a lot of new companies also to this list. Quality, we talk about Sony, Lexus, Cadillac, Pepsi, Kodak. Kodak, now I think they are struggling, but there was a time they were known for quality. So time, rapid delivery, on-time delivery. So that is another area. A supplier can also have such strategies, and if a company has, let's say, 100 suppliers, and if a supplier consistently can deliver on time, so they are obviously more valuable to this company. They can also have a strategy about flexibility, service, location, and some examples like Burger King for flexibility, Disneyland for service, banks, ATMs based on location. Nowadays, we are living in a situation where globalization is very common. Like every company now aspires to be a global company, and obviously they have to develop their strategies accordingly. Strategic decisions must be made with respect to globalization. When developing such strategies, obviously it is very important. Now, what works in one country may not work in another country. So that's the disadvantage of globalization. But company has to address those issues. Like what was successful, it doesn't mean that it is going to be successful all the time. So one example is again Microsoft. CEO of Microsoft was in China, and in one of his speeches, he quoted some numbers like the number of PCs which are used in United States compared to China. They are almost same in terms of numbers. How many PCs or computers are being used? So China has a much bigger population. So percentage-wise, it may be smaller than US, but in terms of numbers, the numbers are very close. But the main problem is that compared to US, their business or profits in China for Microsoft is almost 1/10, in spite of number of PCs being more or less similar. So that's a big problem because of piracy and things like that, they lose a lot of business when they are trying to compete outside US. A company has to obviously be careful, and they should understand what works in one country may not work in other country. Another example is actually Walmart. So when Walmart opened their first store in Japan, their strategy was obviously to compete on low cost. They had to struggle because in Japan, because of their culture, low cost or low price is considered of poor quality. They had to modify things to suit the environment in which they were doing business. Strategies must be changed to account for these differences. So obviously one has to be, if a company wants to be successful, they have to adopt strategies to overcome these problems. There are other issues like political, social, cultural, economic differences. So like Google nowadays is having tough time in China because of all kinds of problems they are facing. We talked about distinctive competencies or core competencies. Also, environmental scanning is important. One has to look at what's going on in their area of business, what the competitors are doing, what strengths they have within the company, and how they are competing with their competitors, and what is happening globally, even politically in different areas of the world. So all that has to be taken into account while developing a strategy. SWOT analysis is also done. SWOT stands for strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. So out of these four, strength and weakness has and internal focus. So obviously, it is done by operations people. Whereas opportunities and threat, this is from outside. So this has external focus. And because of its nature, it is done by marketing people. And then also, people look at order winners and order qualifiers to form their strategies. So these two are defined on the next slide. So order qualifiers are characteristics that customers perceive as minimum standards. So that is important. These are the basic bare minimum standards of acceptability to be considered as a potential purchase. For example, when iPad 2 was launched with 499 as the lowest price, just I think few days or weeks before that, Motorola came out with Zoom, which was supposed to compete with iPad 2, but the price was I think 700 or more. Obviously, Apple set this 499 as a minimum standard of acceptability in this market of tablets. So their competitors have to do something so that they can still compete. Otherwise, people look at price and they do not buy the product. Order qualifiers in themselves are not sufficient. It is necessary, but not a sufficient condition for success. A company also need to have order winners. The characteristics of an organization's goods or services that cause it to be perceived as better than the competition. So due to whatever reason, if customers feel that this is better than the competitor, then that becomes an order winner. There are key external factors which impact any strategy formulation. So as you would think, economic conditions are important. So when a company is making a strategy or even organizational strategy, they are always looking at what will be the economic conditions during that period. So for example, if the future is not looking good in terms of economic conditions, if there is a fear of recession, that the economy may not be doing well, so obviously strategy has to incorporate those facts. If they make a strategy which ignores economic conditions of the future and they think that the conditions will be good and it turns out to be very bad, then they may be spending a lot of money on the capacity and machines and they may be just sitting idle. Political condition is also important. For example, a company wants to do business in, say, Afghanistan, which is always having problems related to some war or the other going on. So obviously, one has to take into account while making a strategy whether it is worthwhile to start a business where there is a lot of political instability. Legal environment. I gave one example of Microsoft trying to do business in China because of the legal environment and the piracy related laws, their profits suffer. So that they have to take into account. A company also needs to look at what are the technological advances that are available. So for example, now looking at the future, 6 months, 1 year, everybody is talking about cloud computing. And companies like Amazon, Apple, so they are trying to come out with products which can have those features. Also, a company has to look at competition and what are the markets. And then there are key internal factors. So human resources, people within the company, what kind of skills they have, what talents they have. Strategies have to be formed around that because ultimately people are going to do the work. So strategy should be such that they look at what skills, what talents these people have so that we can be competitive. Facilities and equipment. Financial resources, where there will be finance available to do what a company wants to do, how customers will react, whether they will be positive with their plans, what products and services ultimately they can offer, what technology they already have internally, who are the suppliers, how reliable they are, can they deliver on time consistently. So all those things people have to look at while developing the strategies. Nowadays, many companies also use what is called as balanced scorecard. You may say it is a tool that helps to put strategies into action because strategies are only plans. they have to be converted into action. Balanced scorecard includes things like focus on the customers, the internal processes, and so on. The only thing they don't include is sustainability. Operation strategy obviously is not done in isolation. It is derived from the organization strategy. So it has to be consistent with those companies' overall mission and goals. So there are different strategies which are used, and one of them is quality-based strategies. So focuses on maintaining or improving the quality of organization's products or services. There are so many companies which have made their names because of better quality. Now, quality is something which is created at the source. Created at the source means all the processes which are involved in producing those products and services. While doing that, they make sure that there is a quality. It is very old-fashioned, like in earlier days, you make all the parts and then do 100% inspection. So suppose today a company produces, let's say, 10,000 items. So what they will do, they will inspect each and every item and then separate those items which are bad and then send to the market those items which are good. This has proven to be a very, very inefficient and expensive way, because those items which are bad, nothing can be done about it. Even if you want to rework and correct those problems, it is going to cost money. But if they are created first time right, then you are not spending any extra money and you are able to produce that part right the first time. So that will be the cheapest way of producing something. So quality at source is very important. One should not wait till the finished item or the final inspection. There is a saying in the quality field that you cannot inspect quality into a product. So by inspecting, you are not improving quality. You are adding only extra cost. There are time-based strategies also which focuses on reduction of time needed to accomplish tasks. So if you look at the next slide, so let's say this slide is a plan by a supplier and they want to deliver something on time to their customers so that they can increase their business with the customer and thereby earn more money for the company. Now, this customer could be a big company like Ford Motor Company, which has hundreds of suppliers for a particular important part. So if a company can develop and deliver these parts on time consistently, obviously that company will stand out, and big companies, they may award them more business and give them chance to be more profitable. So productivity, it is a measure of effective use of resources, usually expressed in as the ratio of output to input. Now, please remember that productivity is different from value addition we talked about earlier. So value added generally is equal to output minus input. But here we are talking about for productivity, it is the ratio of output to input. So productivity ratios are used for planning workforce requirements, scheduling equipments, and financial analysis, and so on. So productivity, as you can see, is output divided by input. You could have partial measures. We'll look at some examples. You could have multi-factor measures. You will see that in whatever formula in the next few slides, output is constant. It is in the numerator. Basically, we are changing the denominator to get different types of measures. But the total measure of productivity is output divided by total inputs. Now, productivity growth, you have the formula here, current minus previous productivity divided by the previous period productivity. So let's say the current period productivity is 84%, and in the previous period it was 80. So we improved by 4%. So if you want to find productivity growth, so using the formula, you can divide it by 80, and if you multiply by 100, you will get 5% as productivity growth. So different formulas are given here. If you are looking at partial measures, so you can calculate productivity for the labor, or for the machine, or for the capital, or for the energy, and so on. Or you could have multi-factor where you have more than one factor in the denominator like labor and machine, or labor, capital and energy, and so on. So some examples are given here. Labor productivity, units of output per labor hour, units of output per shift. So somebody may calculate per shift or per hour. Machine productivity, again per hour or per machine hour. Capital productivity, obviously it will be in terms of dollars, and so on. Let's look at one example. So suppose we have 7,040 units. So that's the output. And we have different costs for labor, materials, and overhead. So what is the multi-factor productivity? We can call this as multi-factor productivity. So MFP equals, so output is 70/40, and we divide by these three costs here, 1,000 plus 520 plus 2,000. So if you calculate, you should get an answer of 2 units per dollar of input as multi-factor productivity. So this is how we get 2 units per dollar of input. And sometimes we also look at what is called as process yield. So process yield is the ratio of output of good products. So good is underlined. We only look at good and not the defective items. So one example for service is ratio of cars rented to cars available to rent. Now from manufacturing, we may say suppose somebody had 1,000 as input, and after processing you have 100 items which were bad or defective and 900 items which were good. So process yield is 900 divided by 1,000, so 90%. So what are the factors that affect productivity? If somebody has to list that, it could be a long list, but the most important ones are obviously capital. If the capital is not available, for example, if a machine needs repair because it slows down unless it is repaired, that is going to impact productivity. Quality always affects productivity because any defective item produced, somebody has to rework, and all that will be non-value adding activities. Technology can be used for improving productivity, like sometimes using smartphone, for example, a busy person or busy executive can reply to emails even while traveling. So that improves the productivity with the help of technology. Management play a very important role. So if management supports improvements and things like that, then obviously productivity will be better. Now, sometimes people try to improve productivity also by outsourcing. So higher productivity in another company is a key reason organizations outsource work. If there is a company with all its resources able to produce only 10,000 items a day, whereas there is another company which has improved its internal processes to such an extent they can produce maybe 1,500 with equivalent resources. So obviously that will reduce the cost for the company, and it will make sense for this company to outsource because they are doing same thing in a much better way at a much lower cost. So improving productivity may reduce the need for outsourcing. But if this company can themselves make improvements so that they can improve their productivity maybe from 1,000 to 1,500 or 1,600, then there's no need for spending money on outsourcing. So how do people improve productivity? There are some guidelines given on the next slide. Develop productivity measures. So there's a saying that what you cannot measure cannot improve. So it always starts with measuring it, where we stand. So that gives an idea where we are so that we can decide where we need to go. And then determine critical or bottleneck operations. So what are the problem areas? Those need to be identified. Develop methods for productivity improvement. Those people who are working in that area day in and day out, they have a lot of ideas using which improvements can be made. That resource can be tapped for coming out with methods for productivity improvements. And then establish reasonable goals. It's not that if our productivity is 1,000 and we want to improve directly to 10,000, which is maybe looks good, but it may not be realistic. Now, because this may need resources and management support, so one has to be in touch with them so that efforts do not get derailed. Measure and publicize the improvement. So once the improvements take place, then it should be also measured so that people continue to monitor it so that it doesn't fall down. And also, it gives to other areas, other processes, other departments to make improvements in their areas. But don't confuse productivity with efficiency. So efficiency and productivity are different things. So efficiency is like doing things right. And like if you compare with effectiveness, which is more close to productivity, then that means doing right things. So one has to do right things, then only there will be improvement.